Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for this evening's masterclass that's facilitated by us, the NDCO program. This evening we're going to be discussing and learning more on the work of Helen Cooke, the Director of MyPlus Consulting in the UK, on how they provide employers and students with disability with the confidence, insight and support that they need to realise their new possibilities. My name is Debbie Roscoe, and I am the NDCO for Southern Queensland, and I'm joined by my colleague David Swain, who is the NDCO for Northern Queensland. For those not familiar with our program, the NDCO is funded through the Australian Government, the Department of Education and Training, and it's a program that is aimed towards increasing the economic and social participation of people with disability. Across Australia, you will find an NDCO who is familiar with your region. There is 31 of us all up. And we work strategically to assist people with disability access and participate in tertiary education and then subsequent employment. And we do this by improving linkages, working with local networks to identify barriers and building the capacity of stakeholders. And with all of this, people with disability will then have increased knowledge and information to make informed decisions and a greater awareness of what is available to them to enable them to reach their goals in their education, training and employment. Make sure my screen goes next. Before we start, we'd just like to acknowledge and thank the Australian Disability Clearinghouse on Education Training, or ADCET for short, that provides information, advice and resources to disability practitioners, academics, teachers and students on inclusive practices and support within the post-secondary education sector, for again allowing us to use their go-to webinar platform. We really appreciate it, thank you. And if you haven't signed up for their newsletter, the information there is on that slide. Just want to do a few housekeeping details before we do commence. Firstly, there's going to be an opportunity to ask questions. So if you do have a question, you'll notice on the right-hand side of your computer, there is a box, a question box. So you're welcome at any time during the webinar to write your question in there. And David will collate all those questions that come through and we will present those to Helen during the Q&A session. We will have one poll that will happen during the webinar as well. And we really like these because it provides us with your thoughts in real time. But we just want to raise awareness for those that are using the caption live feeds. During that poll, the live feed will cut out for a short duration. There will be nothing said by any presenter while these feeds, while this happens, but we will provide a warning before it all happens, and we'll also read out the live poll question and results after the poll data is collected. If for any reason that you're unable to use the question box over there on the right-hand side of your screen, or it's not accessible to you, you are welcome to email David directly your question, and he will ensure that that is incorporated into the Q&A session. So David's email is davids@stepsgroup.com.au. There is one more chance to ask a question of Helen if you are unable to during the webinar, and that is through our short survey that will happen at the end of this webinar. And Helen has gratefully said that she will look at all questions that have not answered and will respond to those, and we will forward those out with the email address that you have provided us. I'd also like to welcome Sandy from Reporters Inc. Thank you, Sandy, for all your work that you have done with us this year. We really appreciate it, and providing the live captioning for us today. So let's get to the webinar. We are so pleased to be able to bring this masterclass to you. And in particular, we'd really like to acknowledge the taking of your time this evening to spend that with us. We're very grateful for that. So I'd like to hand over to David now to introduce Helen Cooke, our presenter, and we will commence.
Thanks, Deb. Evening, everybody. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Helen. So for those who aren't familiar, Helen's recognised nationally in the UK as a leading expert in disability and graduate recruitment. And she's passionate about ensuring that having a disability or a long-term health condition will not prevent anyone from having the career that they'd like to have. Helen works with employers to help them recognise the unique talents and strengths that individuals with disabilities can and do bring to an organisation. In 2010, Helen launched the MyPlus Recruiters Club, which is an innovative membership forum for organisations to gain and share insights, build greater disability confidence, and realise the possibilities of opening up graduate recruitment to students with disabilities. Members include Barclays, BP, Ernst Young, Enterprise Holdings, GSK, and Herbert Smith Freehills. Now, recognising the need to raise the career aspirations of people with disability, in 2013, Helen went on to launch the MyPlus Students Club. The MyPlus Students Club is an innovative website which provides students with disabilities or long-term health conditions the advice, support, and motivation to find opportunities, approach relevant organisations, and go on to realise new possibilities with progressive employers. And Helen, you'll forgive me, I've cut your bio wonderfully short. There's many more things I can say, but I think what I'd like to do is, I see that we're ready to go. I'd like to hand it over to you. And I know that your experience and achievements will shine through in the next, what have we got, 55 minutes. So thank you, Helen, for being with us this evening and this morning. And we appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you, David. A lovely introduction, and I'm absolutely delighted to join you all. And thank you very much, as David's already said, for giving up your evenings. As you know, us Brits like to talk about the weather. It's 9 o'clock in the morning here on a very, very cold morning. We've woken up to a heavy frost, hence sitting in here in a very thick jumper trying to keep warm. So obviously today we're going to be talking about disability and student recruitment and employment. As David said, at MyPlus, we work with employers to build their confidence, to ensure they're tapping into this talent pool. We work with students to raise their aspirations, to recognise their ability and aspire to the roles out there. And I very much see the career services as the link in the middle, bringing these two together, and we work with the career services as well. So in terms of what we're going to be doing today, we're going to start off by just reminding ourselves what's included under the term disability. We're going to look at the challenges faced by disabled students, particularly the issue of openness, often called disclosure, as well as the other issues, challenges and questions that they have as they begin their employment journey. We're just going to remind ourselves of the strength that disability can provide. I think it's very easy to think of disability, remind us, think about the things we can't do or can no longer do, but actually we really need to be encouraging individuals to see the strength in their disability. We're going to talk about employer engagement, and then the last thing we're going to touch on is about supporting disabled students through the recruitment process. It's quite a lot to go through. It's going to be a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but hopefully it'll give you a really great overview of just some of the things that we're looking at here at MyPlus. And obviously, hopefully, the opportunity to perhaps do some more going forward. So we're going to start with a poll question. And David, I'm going to hand over to you for this, if that's okay.
Yes, for sure. So with the polls, Deb did mention that the captions feed will drop out. I'm going to leave the poll up for 30 seconds, and then we'll come back. So if you're there, don't leave it too long to vote. And if you are using the captions, be confident in knowing that nothing will be said while the poll's up, okay? So Helen and I will be quiet for a little while. The poll question again is, do you feel you have all of the resources to confidently advise students with disability about careers and recruitment processes? And it's a simple answers, it's yes or no. So I'll send that to you. Okay, we're back. And Sandy's there, yes. So I think we're all in the right place. So the poll results for do you feel you have the knowledge, expertise, support and resources to confidently advise students with disability about careers and support them through the application recruitment process? 27% do feel that they do have that, and 73% feel that they don't. So hopefully we can provide a little bit tonight, and then we'll work out what we need to do after that.
Brilliant, thank you for that. Thanks for participating. And absolutely, let's hope that by the end, people are feeling a little bit more knowledgeable about this area. So let's just move on and start off with the question of, when we talk about disability, what are we actually talking about? It's a massive subject, but when we talk about disability, we're talking about long-term health conditions, we're talking about mental health conditions. And what I'd be interested in the, I think it's the chat box, or it might be the questions box, David, you can clarify which one. I'd just be interested for you to write any disability or health condition that springs to mind. So just we can start thinking about what are we actually talking about here. So don't overthink this, don't overcomplicate this. But in your, which box is it, David?
We'll go questions box. I think it's the easiest one. And Helen, you'll be able to access that by opening up the questions section and see for yourself as well. Here we go.
So if you can just start tapping in, disabilities that spring to mind, perhaps the students that you're supporting. It's just great to see what disability means to you, and again, the breadth of disabilities that's actually covered by this subject.
So are they showing on your screen, Helen, or do you want me to run through a few?
No, I've got nothing showing on my screen. So if you can tell me, that'd be great.
We've got mental health, mental illness, intellectual disability, autism, Down syndrome, anxiety, Tourette's, dyslexia, vision impairment, students who are deaf, mental health conditions a number of times. So a fair stretch there.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. No, I couldn't see any of that, so thank you. Absolutely. So you can see that this is a massive subject, and you'll be pleased to know that this isn't about you becoming experts in all the different types of disability. There's far too many of them for that to be the case. I've been working in this space now for 13 years, and I'm not an expert. And I'm a great believer that actually the individual needs to become an expert in their disability, and they need to be able to articulate the support they require. We'll come on to that. And actually what your role is to feel comfortable and confident to engage in the relevant conversations. I think that disability is a subject that we're not always very comfortable with. We don't always know what to say, and we don't know what to do. It always surprises me when I'm out and about. I'm a wheelchair user, I'm on the trains, and people offer me a lot of help, but they often start with, oh, I hope you don't mind me asking, and I don't want to appear rude, because we're so afraid of getting it wrong. So as I said, it's not about becoming an expert in the different types of disability, but it is about feeling comfortable to engage in the conversations. The legal definition, we have to have a legal definition, not least that this group of individuals are protected by the law. And I want to share the definition. This is the UK definition, but speaking with David, the Australian definition is pretty similar. And it says that a person has a disability if they have a physical or mental impairment, which is a substantial and long-term adverse effect on their ability to carry out normal day-to-day activities. Now, I think that's quite an ambiguous term. It's quite a fluffy term. So actually, what is a normal day-to-day activity? And again, I would say that here I am in a wheelchair. I obviously have a disability. Does it affect my normal day-to-day activities? Not really. For me, it's more affected not by the disability, but actually about society and the barriers that society erect. So actually, I live in Windsor, famous because of the recent royal wedding. It's a small station, it's an unmanned station. So me, the barriers that affect my normal day-to-day activities is the fact that, is there a guard around to get me onto the train? Is there going to be a guard to get me off when I get in London? Are the lifts working? It's all those sorts of things that affect my normal day-to-day activities much more than actually being in a wheelchair. I think that a couple of things around this definition is that disability is a harsh label. Not everybody wants to be labelled with that term, and therefore some people don't see themselves as having a disability. So things like dyslexia absolutely would be covered by this legal definition. However, some people would say, absolutely, I see my dyslexia as a disability. I've had challenges. I've had to deal deal with that. I've had to develop coping mechanisms. Absolutely, if I was asked if I had a disability, I would say yes. And other people would say in a million years, no way. And I would never tick that box on an application form. I don't see my dyslexia as a disability. So how you see yourself, I think needs to be taken in consideration. And I think the other thing is that we come across people who seemingly have very similar disabilities, but actually their ability to do normal day-to-day activities can be very, very different. And that will be due to a number of things. For example, when they became disabled, the impact of that disability, the impact on confidence. It will be to do with their rehabilitation, the support they've had, the support network around them. It may be to do with the pain that they're in, the medication that they're on, and all of that will impact normal day-to-day activities. Hence, we meet people that a seemingly very similar disability, and one is living a very independent life, they're working, travelling, involved in sport, social activities, and the other person won't be doing any of that at all, but there may be very, very genuine reasons about why those differences are. And you had a great list already, but you know, that list of disabilities is absolutely vast. So let's move on. The next area I wanted to talk about was just sort of understanding this talent pool. If we're going to support them into employment, we obviously have to understand any talent pool we're supporting into employment. We have to understand them. We have to understand their wants, their concerns, their questions, and that's absolutely true of disabled individuals as well. But let's just start with a few stats. I love a few stats. So almost 6.5% of students in Australian universities have a disability. And that's a massive 100% increase between 2008 and 2016. And that's the fastest growing equality group in Australia. And I just wanted to put the UK figure in there as well. And the reason for that is that that's actually, you know, quite a lot higher. It's almost double. In the UK, disabled students receive a disability student allowance. It's addition to anything else, addition to what their non-disabled students have. And that's to cover the additional costs of studying with a disability. And obviously the only way that you can access that disabled student allowance is by being open. I guess there's an incentive to be open to disclose your disability. Hence, I think that figure is a lot higher. So what you may find is that there are an awful lot more students in Australia that have a disability, but at the moment they're not choosing to be open about that, and we'll come on to that. We know that our disabled graduates are less likely to obtain full-time employment than their non-disabled graduates. And we also know from research that we've done that over 3/4 of disabled students said that they were concerned to inform an employer about their disability. And we're going to come on to that because that's a huge number of people, a huge amount of fear that's out there that's either stopping individuals obtain employment, or indeed they are applying for employment and they're being rejected because of barriers in the recruitment process, because they're not getting the support that they require. And if students don't work, they miss out on all the benefits of employment. I'm a great believer that work is good for us. It's not just about money, and money's a housekeeping factor. And I know that we'd all prefer an extra hour in bed in the morning, but actually for many of us, it's the first question we ask people. So what do you do? It's our contribution, it's our self-esteem, it's our self-worth, it's how we develop our skills. It's our social interaction. When I look at the friends that I have, I've made them through work. If you haven't got a reason to get up in the morning for something like work, you know, that's where the mental health issues start coming in. We're still in bed at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. We don't have social interaction. We don't build our confidence. We miss out. And it's not just the individual that misses out. Employers are missing out on a huge talent pool if they're not inclusive of this talent group. So let's just move on to think about your talent pool. As I said, we have to understand any group of individuals. Employers do, careers advisors do, if we're going to attract them into our organisations, and indeed as careers advisors, if we're going to support them on their employment journey. And as a whole, I think disabled individuals have the same career aspirations and wants that their non-disabled counterparts have. They want to know about the organisation, they want to know about the culture, they want to know about the opportunities, the benefits, the training that's provided, the opportunity to work abroad. But on top of that, as a result of having a disability, potentially you've got this other whole swathe of questions and issues and concerns going on that we need to understand if we're going to support them into the workplace. And another question for you again, which if you can use your chat box here, is it the chat box, David?
Let's call it the chat box. It's the only box that's there. We know that over 3/4 of disabled students don't want to be open about their disability with an employer. They don't want to disclose it. Why is that? I'd just love you to write some of your thoughts about why are students so reluctant to be open about their disability. So we've got potential discrimination, negative past experiences, stigma, feel like they'll be discriminated against, they don't know where the information will go.
Yep.
Embarrassed, stigma, discrimination, potential bullying, scared of being singled out, ability to include is not achieved, potential judgment, afraid it will affect how the employer sees them, don't want to be judged, fear of failing, privacy issues, stigma, discrimination, inability, high rate of exclusion, looked down on, poor self-image, judgment, don't want to be different, unaware of the disability. And the last one is want to be treated equal. There's more. Want to be treated equally to others, embarrassment, plenty of engagement, and thank you all.
Thank you. Yeah, and they're all absolutely spot on. And I think it's just worth starting with this, is that we often talk about disclosure. So people will often say, why don't students want to disclose or declare? And I don't think that language helps. And I talk with employers about this. It makes it sound like we've got this terrible secret that we're going to let out of the box. Why can't we talk about openness? Why can't we talk about informing? Why can't we talk about telling? So I think one of the things that we perhaps have to think about is the language that we use to start with. Now, we did some research a few years ago about this, and I wanted to understand why individuals were so concerned about being open. Because until the employers understand that and can address these issues, individuals are going to continue to not be open about their disability. And actually what we found was that, as I said, 76% of individuals, so that's a huge proportion, said, I don't want to tell an employer about my disability. And what was happening was either they were so concerned about being open that they weren't applying for jobs in the first place. They just didn't want to go there. They were taking themselves out of the process, or they were spending an awful lot of time applying for jobs, but they were hitting a barrier in the recruitment process. So no employer intentionally has barriers in their recruitment process, but actually the support that they can have, maybe extra time, use of technology, use of an interpreter, handouts in advance, none of that's going to be provided if they're not open about their disability. And those are the barriers we're talking about. And potentially they are going to be rejected for a job that they are absolutely capable of doing. And that's why being open is so very, very important. And I'm going to come on to the Students' Club website at the end, but we've got some amazing ebooks all about openness, the benefits of being open, the consequences of not, and actually how and when students can be open about their disability. So you had all of these on there. The biggest reason that individuals didn't want to inform an employer was fear of discrimination. Not surprisingly, I tell you, you don't want me. And when we've done focus groups, and indeed when we talk to students, we did a big student event on Tuesday, there's this fear that I'm going to be seen as a lesser individual, a weaker individual. And it's really sad to hear, I'm sure you've heard this in the conversations that you've had, that they're going to find a reason to take me out of this process. Nearly as important, or nearly as an equal up there, was actually, I don't want to cause a fuss or a hassle. And I remember when I was applying for jobs, and I can smile about it now, because I just wanted to be normal. And I now realise that normal doesn't exist. But you don't want to fuss, you don't want to hassle, you don't want to ask something that others aren't asking for. And we forget that actually in the UK it's 1 in 8, and for you again it's nearly 7% of your students potentially going to be asking for something. But actually the individual doesn't recognise that. We just think we're causing a fuss or hassle. Again, don't want to appear different, ashamed or embarrassed, particularly if it's a new disability, not come to terms with it. Again, it's very easy to think I'm the only one. Don't see their condition as a disability, going back to the dyslexia. I don't require any adjustments. And equally, fear of favourable treatment. I don't want to be your quota. I don't want to be your number. I don't want to discriminate, but I don't want to have favourable treatment here. And then in addition to the openness, what concerns may disabled individuals have, in addition to disclosure, again, you talked about a lot of these, the judgments and assumptions. And again, I remember in a focus group, somebody said, once I've told the employer it's out there, I can't take it back, and they'll Google it and they'll make their judgments about my ability and what I need, what I can and can't do. And normally it's what I can't do. We talk about adjustments, we talk about reasonable adjustments because that's what the law says. The employers say to me, well, I don't know what's reasonable, how far do we have to go? And the individual's asking the same question, well, what's reasonable to ask for? And particularly where cost is involved. And the more cost that's involved, the more reluctant I'm going to be to actually ask for any support. Is there anybody else? Can I do the job? Somebody also talked about, gosh, it's gone clean out of my head. But these, confidentiality. That's another really good one as well. We often ask this question around, do you have a disability? Do you require any support? But the employer doesn't tell the individual where that information is going. We don't reassure them of confidentiality, and not surprisingly, my fear is that I'm going to turn up on day one and everybody's going to know about my little secret. And again, one of the work that I do with employers is really talking to them about you have to reassure them of confidentiality. You have to talk to them about the fact that this information is only being used to provide those adjustments and it's not going anywhere else. So lots and lots of fear, not surprisingly, about this. Are there any questions at this point that anybody's got? David, I'm going to have to ask you to let me know if there are.
Yeah. No questions.
No questions, okay.
I had to mute myself because I was agreeing with you verbally, so.
Okay. Please stop me if there are. I want to move on now to talk about MyPlus. So we're called MyPlus. And I think when it comes to disabilities, I said at the very beginning, it's very easy, particularly for employers, to think about the things that somebody can't do, or somebody can no longer do, the things that they're going to find difficult. And I think that individuals often think the same as well, particularly when we compare ourselves. And employers want the best. They talk about they want the best talent, and they want individuals who are sort of the creme de la creme, who are at it and on it and in it and over it all of the time. We've got to be switched on, we've got to be stretched and challenged. And when we compare ourselves to others, it's very easy to think, but they're better than me, and to concentrate on the things that we can't do and can't do in comparison to our non-disabled counterparts. And I think it's really, really important for disabled individuals, like any individual, to recognise their strengths. And actually to recognise the strengths that you may have developed as a result of managing a disability. And I would say, I don't believe that I'm any more special than anyone else, but I do believe my disability has given me something extra. And it's given me that because managing a disability on a day-to-day basis in a world that's not always geared up for it is a challenge. As I said, I go up to London. My challenge is, first of all, is there going to be an accessible parking space? There aren't that many near the station. And actually, I need that space. There might be other parking spaces, but unless I can physically open my car door to get my chair out, I'm stuck. Is there going to be somebody to help me onto that train? Are they going to remember to get me off the other end when I get to London? Are the black cab drivers going to be great? Are they going to help me into their cabs? Normally they're brilliant. I have to give them full marks. They are normally absolutely brilliant. Are the lifts going to be open? There are parts of London Underground that I can use, very little. But if the lifts are open again, I can have spent 20 minutes on the Underground and I can't get out at the station the other end. And those are challenges that you deal with. And as a result of that, those are the skills that you develop. And I would say, what have I developed? Well, determination to actually overcome the barriers in front of me and to do what I want when others are trying to stop me. I remember when I was 19 years old in my year out, and I told my parents I was going to go to Australia for 3 months. I mean, I hadn't been further than France with my family, and next minute I was doing this long haul flight on my own. Boy, did I have to be determined to convince them that I was going to do it, and I did. There is that problem solving that I've just talked about. Communication skills, articulating to others the things that I can't do myself when I have to ask somebody to do things for me. Interpersonal skills is about building relationships again, particularly when I need people to help me. And the list can go on and on. When we talk mental health, obviously it's a massive challenge at the moment. Resilience is one of the key competences, skills that employers are asking again and again and again. But the resilience that individuals are building up, whether it's to deal with poor mental health, breaking their back, losing their sight, dealing with the stigma of whatever disability they have. And I think that, again, by encouraging individuals to be open about disability, in an interview, they can draw on that when they're trying to articulate, trying to prove, demonstrates what I'm looking for, the skills and competencies that an employer is asking for. Now, they can't draw on their disability to answer every single question in the same way that they wouldn't draw on their sport or their involvement in drama or whatever it is to answer every single question. But I think that it's absolutely valid to be able to draw on their disability to demonstrate some of those skills and competencies. And a great exercise is actually to get individuals to think about what is the plus that perhaps you've developed as having a result of your disability. So let's just move on now to talk about employer engagement. A big part of this, obviously, is we've got to have employers that are engaged with this agenda, who, I guess what I call them the intelligent employers, who get it, who recognise that there is a huge talent pool out there. And if they're not disability confident, they're going to miss out on that. And it's not just in the UK, the 1 in 8 students that have a disability. It's also the fact that people become disabled. A few stats for you. 83% of people acquire their disability. 83% are not born with it, they acquire it. And the average age is 43. So sometimes we say if you don't have one, it's not a matter of I don't have a disability, it's simply a matter of I don't have one yet. Something to look forward to. But we have an ageing population, people are going to be working longer, and actually if employers can't support people in the workplace, they're going to lose a whole load of talent. And it's much more effective to be able to retain talent than it is to have to re-recruit and redevelop and retrain individuals. So how do we, when we're advising disabled students about engaging with employers, what is it that employers want? Well, first of all, they want talent. That's what they want. They want the best person for the job. And that person may come in all sorts of different guises, whether it's gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, disability, belief, socioeconomic group. The most important thing is that they want talent. And I'm a great believer that employing disabled individuals is not about lowering standards. It's about the employer being able to put those adjustments in place and then being able to recruit somebody on the equal basis to everybody else. So it's not about discrimination, but equally it's not about favourable treatment either. So the applicant has to submit a high quality application. There is no excuse for any individual, including those that have a disability, to put in a substandard application. The employers want them to inform them about their disability. They don't want all the ins and outs of their medical case. They don't want medical records. It doesn't mean a thing to them. And in fact, they probably don't even want to know what the disability is. What they want to know is what support you'll require. It doesn't matter why I'm sitting here in a wheelchair. I have a spinal cord injury, but I could be a double leg amputee. I could have MS. I could have all sorts of different things. But what the employer actually needs to understand is that I need access on these inaccessible toilets, story of my life. And if I'm driving, I'm going to need a parking space. So you don't need to go into the ins and outs of the disability, but they do need to inform them of the adjustments and support that they're going to require. The individual needs to be honest and reasonable about what they require. They're honest and reasonable and talk about what they need rather than what they want. The employer will respect that. I had an example recently from an employer, one of my clients, who said that the student's statement around dyslexia gave them 25% extra time, which is standard, but the individual was asking for 50% with no real justification. And that's when we start muddying the waters. As I said, they do need to become an expert in what they require. It's not always easy because we may have only just acquired a disability. It may be fluctuating. It may be the first time we've gone through a recruitment process. It might be the first time that we are entering employment. But they need to become an expert in what they require in order to be able to articulate that to the employer. As I said right at the very beginning, you're not expected to be experts in all the different types of disability, neither is the employer, but they do need to be able to communicate with the individual, and therefore the individual needs to know what they require. They've got to make themselves available to communicate. It's very easy for individuals to turn around and say, well, the employer didn't do anything for me. And then you find out, well, the employer says, well, we tried to contact them on 4 occasions and they never picked up their phone or answered their emails. The individual should provide feedback on support adjustments. Again, positive or in a positive way. They might not be right, that's fine. But, think about how you frame what you're saying to them. And ultimately, what the individual needs to do is to help them to understand. I often say to an employer, they all have to start somewhere. And they may not have had an applicant who has a visual impairment or who's autistic. And I think 99% of the time, if you said to an individual, look, we haven't recruited somebody that requires the support you require, can you help us to do that? Most individuals would say absolutely. And I think that is part of the responsibility for the individual. They need to help the employer to understand what their situation is and what it is that they require. So let's just think about that, and then so that's what the employer wants. Let's now think about the adjustments that an employer is potentially able to put in place for an individual. Now, when it comes to recruitment adjustments, the million-dollar question is, what is reasonable? And I think there's 4 things that an employer has to bear in mind when deciding whether or not an adjustment is reasonable. They first of all need to think about, is the adjustment effective? So actually, again, this goes back to, is it needed rather than is it just wanted? Will it prevent the disadvantage it's meant to be preventing? We need to think about, is it practical? Realistically, it's not practical to put an accessible toilet in within a week. We can go and have the interview in a coffee shop if needs be, and we can put those adjustments in place once the individual gets the job. So we need to think about, is it practical for the employer to do that? We also need to think about disruption. A lot of employers use group selections, group discussions, and it's not about accommodating one person at the expense of everybody else. And the individual needs to think about that. It's the same if they turn up on the morning and say, actually, I'm going to need 25% extra time during the day. That's going to cause them a lot of disruption. They can accommodate it, but they probably would have need at least 24 hours to be able to do that. So the individual again needs to think about, is it going to cause disruption, and how do we minimize that? And the other thing that we need to think about is the employer's financial and other resources in order to be able to make those adjustments. And I think during the recruitment process, a lot of employers would be hard pushed to say we can't afford to do that from a financial point of view. But sometimes it's the other resources that might not be available. So we had an example a while ago when an individual was coming to an event and they were flying down from the north of England, and they wanted to be met by the employer at the airport at Heathrow. And actually, majority of firms don't have somebody sort of just floating around who can pop out to Heathrow for a couple of hours to pick somebody up. That wasn't a reasonable request for them to do that. We said that the individual could bring someone with them, and the company would pay for the cost of that, or indeed they would pay for a taxi. So again, it's looking about what's reasonable, but they didn't have a spare person to go out, and I think that was fair for the organisation to say that. So what I've got here is I've got a scenario about making adjustments. We've got a candidate that's deaf. They communicate mainly by lip reading, and they sometimes use an interpreter. And they're coming to an assessment centre, which has a 45-minute interview, a written exercise, and a group discussion. And again, I'd like you to use your chat box to think about what are the adjustments that he could ask for to ensure that he can demonstrate his potential. So what would it be reasonable for him to ask the employer to put in place ahead of the assessment centre to ensure that he has a fair crack of the whip? And again, if you can, as I said, use your chat box, that would be brilliant. And David can tell me what's in there.
So we've got, can request an interpreter, provide more time in the interview, interpreter, list of questions in advance, written documents provided, request captioning, access to interpreter, one-on-one conversation, structured turn taking in the group, interview process, use an alternate recruitment process.
Yeah.
Interpreted written documents and variations of all of those sorts of anything else.
Brilliant.
Speaking at one at a time, so making sure that the clarity is there.
Absolutely. So this is a scenario that I tweak slightly to use with employers and sort of say what can you do. The 45-minute interview is probably going to be extra time. The individual may require an interpreter. The individual needs to say whether they want that or not. Certainly extra time, and probably to think about the seating, where are they going to sit to ensure that they can see people if they are lip reading. Obviously if the person asking the interviews has got a window behind them, you've got the shadow, it's not easy to lip read. The written exercise is probably straightforward. Often employers will read some instructions out. So again, do those need to be interpreted? Do those need to be written down? If they're going to give a time warning, they need to think about how they do that. But the group discussion is the key one here. And I think that the individual has to really think, does this group discussion work for me? I know I really want to take part in it, but is it going to enable me to really demonstrate my potential here? It's not easy to say that we've got to talk one at a time and have time for an interpreter. And whoever said we may need to look at the format of the interview is absolutely right. There may be a different way of assessing the same competencies and skills. So it may be they mock it up with some other managers or other trainees that are in the firm. They could do a role play. They might decide to replace it with another interview or another written exercise. The big thing is, don't just not do it. At no point should an individual say, well, I just won't do it. Because as soon as they're rejected, the individual will say, well, you didn't give me as many opportunities as everybody else to demonstrate those competencies. So if they decide that they can't do the group discussion, what are we going to put in its place instead? I've got another one for you. My screen seems to have frozen. Here we go. To accompany an application, an applicant includes a covering letter outlining the adjustments that he will require. And he includes those 4 points. Number 1, to be exempt from any online psychological tests. Number 2, an additional 25% of time to be applied to all timed assessments. 3, not to be assessed on confidence or motivation for the role. And 4, to be able to pause the interview and take breaks. And again, if you can use your chat box, which, if any, of these adjustments is reasonable? Do you think any of those are reasonable? Are all of them reasonable? If you just put the numbers in there, that would be great. David, is there any number that isn't coming up? Or are they all big?
This is interesting, actually. So we've got less all is reasonable than I thought might occur. I haven't seen 3 yet, but I have seen every other number.
Great.
Do we have any 3s out there?
Good. This was a letter that we had a serial applicant. It was a couple of clients had the same covering letter, and it went on quite a lot more than we've got here. So I think, first of all, the way that it was framed wasn't great. He did not get the individual off. It was a very demanding letter with very little background to it. Number one, psychological tests can be very, very difficult, in nigh on impossible for some individuals with some disabilities. And we, again, have to think about, if we're not going to do that online psychological test, what do we do? Is there something else we can replace it with? Can we do it written? What are we assessing goes back to, and how else do we do it? If it is a core part of the assessment centre, which it often is, we do need to work out how we do that differently. Number two, absolutely, if they need that. Number four, I think is reasonable as well. Number three, I agree with all of you. I think that an employer often wants people to be motivated to the role. They want them to want to work for that company, and therefore to say I'm not to be assessed on that, I actually think is unreasonable. Confidence, I think we all employers, I did a lot of interviewing when I was at Mars. We take nerves into consideration, absolutely. But I think that there needs to be a level of confidence, or for it to be something that potentially can be developed, but certainly you want there to be motivation for the role. And I think that number three was unreasonable. But I think just in terms of how they demanded it was what really was not helpful in this case. So I think,
interestingly, not to hold it, but I just thought I'd clarify. There was some 3s, but half of 3, and funny that you clarified at the end. So
okay.
motivation for the role was probably missing, but the confidence is an iffy one.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of the applicant, it's really important when it comes to engaging with the employer and requesting what they require. They've got to engage in conversation. They've got to make themselves available to have these conversations. They need to be honest about what they require. Absolutely be open and honest. Ask for what you need rather than just what you want. They need to become an expert in what they require. They've got to be able to articulate that. As I said, it might not be easy from the off, but that's something they should certainly be thinking about developing. And ultimately help the employer to understand their requirements. As I said, the employer is not going to be an expert in all of this, and help the employer to understand that. So, top tips for students. My top tip for students: if you need support through the recruitment process, you've got to be open about your disability. You can't get that support if you're not open. And I know it's hard. Which is why number 2 is learn how to be open. Be relevant, use everyday language, and request what you require. On the Students' Club website, we've got some templates about an openness statement, where I talk about you need to be able to say, sort of almost, this is my situation. You don't have to tell them the disability. You don't have to say dyslexia. You could say a learning difficulty. You don't have to say I have bipolar. You could say I have poor mental health. You need to say what the implication is on the recruitment process. So I take longer to process information. I may be more anxious. And then talk about what you require. And actually really write that openness statement is what I would say to students. And you've got to love it. You've got to love it. And then you've got to be happy to share that with the employer. And finally, position your disability as a positive. What's your plus? Use it to stand out in a really positive way. it's interesting. Again, I was talking to some clients recently, and they talked about a student who had talked very openly. It was a law firm, very openly about their mental health in an interview. It's one of the Magic Circle law firms, and this guy, they said he was confident, he stood out, and he's been offered a role. And don't therefore be scared to talk about your disability in a positive way. I think it's an asset. So the last couple of things I just wanted to share with you before we stop for some questions is hopefully you are aware of the Students Club website. So this is our online resource to provide really useful and practical advice to disabled students. Although the employers on there are based in the UK and the jobs are UK based, the advice and practical guidance on there is universal. It's absolutely free to use. They just need to sign up with their email address and download the ebooks. There's some amazing stories. There's some amazing blogs. It's all very easy, all very well to say, well, of course it's possible. Of course you can go and work in an organisation with ADHD or Asperger's or visual impairment or bipolar. But we've probably got over 200 stories from individuals who are doing just that, who bring it to life. Also got some great blogs about getting the most out of your time at university. It's not just about the academics, obviously. Students need to be involved in university completely. And we've got some great advice about managing your disability whilst at university, getting involved in clubs and societies, building your confidence, building your CV. So please do go and have a look at that. And then the last thing I just wanted to touch on very briefly was, as I said, we work with employers, we work with students, and we work with career services as well. And we launched our toolkit a couple of months ago for careers advisors to, I guess, help you to better advise this cohort of individuals. It's got some information there around disability. It could be used for training your colleagues, training internally with the career services. And then we've got some conversation cards that can be used to guide the conversations with students on subjects such as openness, identifying your strengths, asking for adjustments. And if you would like more information on that, you can either get that by going onto the Students Club website and onto the university's page, or you can do that by emailing myself. So I was going to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining. I hope you have found it useful. We have got some time for questions, so if anybody would like to submit some questions, we've got time to do that.
We have a few that have queued up, Helen, so that we'll do the best we can with the short amount of time that we have. At what point should an applicant disclose a disability to a potential employer, and what is the recommended way? I know we covered through a number of those things, but when should it happen?
So ideally, I would say as early in the process as possible. However, there is this fear that if I tell you I'm going to be discriminated against, so there is something that says, if you don't want to put it on that application form, what you could do is wait until you've been invited for an interview, or wait until you've been invited to take those tests and then tell them. Personally, I think there's no just straightforward answer. And again, in the ebooks, there's lots of advice on this. As early as possible, and equally when you need that support. So if you need support, if you take myself in a wheelchair, if I had to do some online tests, I don't need anything for online tests. I don't need extra time. I don't need to tell you at that stage. If I'm going to then go into an interview, at that point I need to tell you because I need access. And I also think that because it's very visual, potentially it could take people by surprise if they're not expecting it, and suddenly they're going to be concentrating on me rather than assessing me for the interview. I wouldn't just pop it out in an interview. I don't think that's the right place at all. The purpose of the interview is to assess the individual for the job, not to talk about disability and adjustments. So as early as possible, particularly if you need support. And how, again, there may be time, there may be space on the form. It may be about putting it in your covering letter. You may email them, you may phone them up. There should be different ways of doing that.
That's great. Thanks, Helen. What can a student do to understand more about their specific needs and learn how to articulate it in a manner that's understood by the layperson? So I think we've had a couple of chats about plain English.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the workplace is obviously very, very different from study. And therefore, potentially what they're going to need in the workplace is going to be different from what they've had at university. And what we often find, or sometimes find, is that they've actually had quite a lot of support at university and school, but it's been done so well that they're not necessarily aware of quite how much they've had. But I think it's really about perhaps sitting down and thinking about, so let's start with, this is the recruitment process. Don't worry about the workplace at this point. You haven't got the job. But this is, find out what the recruitment process is and what am I going to need at each stage of that. And then, as I said, use plain English. They don't need to know the ins and outs of your medical history, and they certainly don't need to know all these medical terms. So tell them what's relevant and tell them what you require, and use plain everyday language that someone's going to understand.
I think we can squeeze one more in. Have you had any experience with people who have complex communication impairment and physical disability? There are so many adjustments required. Does this scare employers?
Yeah, we've had a couple of individuals with quite profound difficulties in the way that you're explaining. And I think that, not surprisingly, and actually understandably, it can scare an employer. And the individual is going to have to work really closely with that employer to help them to understand. We had a gentleman, a young lad, he's at Cardiff University a few weeks ago, who had cerebral palsy. And he could walk and he could speak. His speech was affected. And he wants to go into investment banking. And it's about finding that employer. So Barclays, actually, one of the guys at Barclays, they recognise what a great guy he was. He's not going to be right for all parts of investment banking, which is too fast-paced for him, but he is going to be right for other parts of the bank. And again, I think it's difficult, it's challenging, and some employers absolutely are going to be scared. Some of them will then work with you on it. And I know it's very easy to say sometimes, if that employer is running scared and doesn't want to know, it's probably not the right place to go and work. Do you really want to battle this right from the very beginning? But there will be employers out there that will see past those difficulties, and they will put that support in place to enable that individual to do the job.
No, it's great. Okay, so we'd better hand it over to Deb to do a concluding chat. But Helen, thanks so much for sharing all of this wonderful stuff that you know. What I haven't included is the questions, which are comments, which I thank you, and thank you for your time and a lot of this. So I'll pass that on afterwards.
Well, thank you. I've been absolutely delighted to do it. Thank you for asking me. I really appreciate that. Shall I change back to Debbie now?
No, you're right, Helen. You're welcome to leave that slide there, because that has your email address. So if anyone wants to contact you, you know, they can write down your details. But everyone, thank you so much. Gee, that hour went so fast. That was fascinating, Helen. Thank you very much. And I just really want to thank you for getting up early on a very cold day in the UK to come along and speak with us today. It's a topic that is really resonates with us NDCOs. We are working in this space, and any information that comes along in this area, we really digest it very happily. So we could have sat here and listened to you for a lot longer. So thank you very much for that. And well done, David, to facilitate all those questions and those polls and everything. It was very, very impressive to sit here and watch that. But everyone, well, you've made it this far in our webinar, so thank you for that. But I want you to stick around for just a little bit longer to complete a survey. Your feedback is really valuable to us, and it will help us guide what we do in future webinars. So don't hold back, just really tell us what you think, but in a nice way. Also, as mentioned earlier, Helen has agreed to answer any other questions that you may have that we never got to this evening, because I could see them coming in thick and fast. So if there is any other questions that you would like Helen to answer, there is still the opportunity to do that through that feedback survey that you will receive. We have recorded this webinar and it will be up on our website in the next few days. So you're welcome to go back that and share that information along with the PowerPoint. So from Sandy, from Helen, from the UK, David and myself would like to thank you so much for your support of our NDCO webinars during 2018, and we look forward to bringing you more topical discussions in the next year. So thank you once again for your time this evening, and have a great evening. Thank you.